to or should do be like actively engaged in it's just a really open question, right? And I think it's actually one of the things that we're starting to see very different opinionated steps on. I think largely everyone kind of followed the ETH like model for quite some time, just largely kind of like stay out of it and orchestrate and be credibly neutral and try not to be too opinionated, over bias any particular actors and what have you. But I think we've seen a much more like recent move into foundations taking much more directly opinionated bets in their own ecosystems, not being afraid to be biased. And I think some of that will blow up and end terribly. One of the things that I think it can do is, we've seen this kind of vogue of like chains with BD teams and building these very centralized chains where it starts to just look like a company with a token at that point, right? And it limits the agency of participants who don't go through those channels. So if you build these strong channels that are often financed, it doesn't even make sense to not go through them. And quite often you just need to know the BD guys in order to be able to get into it. So that I feel like those networks will burn out quickly. They'll have finite resources and they'll pump it out into these things and then people will just move on to the next one. So largely I think the EF has played it exactly right. It comes with challenges though, right? Because you have to kind of stay out a little bit and that's what's created some of the kickback recently. But yeah, I kind of hope it just continues doing what it does and doesn't there's going to be a temptation to get more, to compete with these other more opinionated foundations, to go more institutionalized, to like try and get more opinionated and more active. So I think it's just going to be a delicate balance.
Yeah, first of all, I really disagreed with the way that people were talking about Ethereum Foundation and mostly Aya a few months ago. I think it was really sad to see that Ethereum, not because they were doing something right or wrong, that's on everyone to decide, but I think it was quite sad that it was reflecting the current cultural moment. Ethereum is, it's sort of a safe haven where we can all express. So I think that period was quite sad. I do agree that, of course, it felt, and working in DeFi as well as in social here, it did feel that the Ethereum Foundation should start talking and paying attention to DeFi because that's the best. First of all, it's the best source of access. It's also where blockchain and Ethereum specifically finds their PMF. But most importantly, it's also a very, very powerful BD that the Ethereum Foundation doesn't have to touch. Because I do agree with you, the Ethereum Foundation shouldn't have a BD arm. That's the cringiest thing you can do. And we're trying to avoid cringe here. Jokes aside, I think the Ethereum Foundation has a particular role. I think staying incredibly neutral is what it should do, but also it should try to follow what we found was PMF, which is financial access, but it also should try to preserve the very special culture that we have. Preservation of culture is usually in a mandate of many foundations already. So I do think that we should take a deeper look at that.
Vitalik, I would ask you to reflect follow-up, but also explain what were the origins of restructuring of ETH, because for many people I think that was quite a surprise, and too many actions were executed at the same time. Lots of content has been published, and I think some folks couldn't cope with following, but what's going on? Where are we going? What are the key changes?
Yeah, I think, a lot of the changes that happened were changes that have been coming for a long time, right? Like Aya, for example, had already, or she had been telling me for years already that she was not expecting her term as the director to last forever, right? And we had been I'd been pushing for expanding the board, and that was one of the steps that we ended up taking. discussion around like like us starting to use DeFi more like that. It was definitely like a shift over the last 6 months or so, and that's like one of the teams to work on like scaling up on. And I think in general it has been something that a bigger thing that we've been doing is trying to like increase our level of presence at the application and closer to the user layer, right? And you can say that like some of our work on L2 interop has like also been part of that. Some of the focus on privacy is like one of those ideas that has always been there, but we definitely have recognized that it's something that needs a much more explicit push. And if you don't have that explicit push, then it's just too easy for people to settle into like much crappier versions of it and say like, oh, okay, it's fine if the thing has a backdoor, and like, oh, it's fine if the thing doesn't have an alt UI, and so the server actually just like sees and runs IP addresses. And so, you have to like push against some of those things. But in general, I think like the way I think about the foundation's role is that the starting point is that like we're there to do the things that the like profit-making actors don't have the incentive to do, or don't have the incentive to do in the right way by default. And at the beginning, like that included just building up the protocol and like building the clients, and increasingly, like we're actually seeing some of that start to become sustainable through the ecosystem, right? And we have self-sustaining client firms. Like if the EF spending on clients reduced to zero tomorrow, like client-dependent development would actually continue. Continue relatively fine. Then on the ZK side, we saw like Succinct and Risk Zero pushing ahead on Ethereum proving, right? But then at the same time, the application layer has become stronger, and so we've started doing more on the application layer as well. And so there's been a lot of those kinds of shifts, and at the same time, I think there's a recognition that like there are shifts that like we have to push against, and that we have to like make sure that the like ecosystem doesn't move too quickly in, right? And like one of those is just Ethereum like flipping over and becoming like business pragmatist, right? And like I think the basic reason not to, right, is that people appreciate Ethereum because it is one of the very, very few chains that has a credible claim to a high level of decentralization on both the social and the technical and the geographic level, right? And that's something which is difficult to gain and difficult to regain and easy to lose, right? And so if we decide like. So like sometimes like when I see these tweets from like researchers saying like, hey, we should go to 1 second block times, like honestly I'm scared, right? And I think it's the thing we should make sure not to do is we should make sure not to like turn low performance into a metric that we strive for because we think low performance is by itself evidence of being decentralized. But like beyond that, like making sure that the decentralization of the network and community remain highly valued is super important, right? And making some of those things more explicit, like making the goals around people running their own nodes more explicit, making the goals in terms of hardware requirements more explicit, like those are things that we've been doing lately, and so that's also been important. So I think it's a mix of all of those things, right? But in general, I think that's adapting from a situation where effectively the Ethereum ecosystem, although didn't exist at the beginning, and the foundation had to create the pond to a situation where Ethereum is one of the players in the pond, and a player that's uniquely fitted to represent certain things, and so it should focus on representing those things.
Side note, we were in talks with the EF recently, and on the privacy side, and there's like, okay, now we want to define an impact. Once we are distributing grants, we want to understand our